Good morning and welcome to the First Baptist Church of Rusk Sunday morning Bible study. We're going to be into our second Bible study from the Old Testament book of Daniel. We'll be looking at verses from chapter 3. So I encourage you to get a Bible or your device of scriptures and look at Daniel chapter 3. We'll read the verses there in a moment and share impressions that God has given me as I've studied for this lesson. Thank you for choosing to tune in and hear the Word of God. You're not relying on me for a message from God, but you're relying on Scripture, the Bible. And I hope that, and I pray that God will enable me to be a vehicle through which He can share some truth to you today. Let's pray. Father, it is a privilege to read your word, to ponder it, to study and try to share impressions that you are giving us from your word. And I pray that you'll do that today. I pray for each one that's tuned in to this Bible study lesson. I know they represent a variety of people and needs and situations, circumstances, all different, and yet in some ways often alike. So we need to hear from you. That is a common denominator. We seek to hear from you, and I pray that you'll allow that to happen today. And I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, we are in the third chapter of Daniel. Daniel was one of many, was thousands of Israelites who had been transported from Judea or Jerusalem, that area, way over into the area of Babylon and the kingdom of the Babylonians, and he was had been chosen along with three other companions that are mentioned prominently in this book, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to be in special service for the King Nebuchadnezzar, because of their quick minds, their aptitude for learning, they were just wholesome, handsome, healthy, and they were just prime candidates, and they were chosen to serve in the king's court. So the king had Daniel in chapter 2, which we're not going to spend much time on, but in chapter 2 of the book of Daniel, this was in the second year of King Nebuchadnezzar's reign. He had this dream, and he couldn't figure it out, and he called on his wise men, astrologers, magicians, and so forth to interpret it. They couldn't, and he got upset because they couldn't, and he was just going to execute all of those categories. His whole staff of wise men, which included Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and because he wanted to know the interpretation of the dream, he couldn't. But so Daniel found out about that. That information came to Daniel that they were about to be executed because of that situation, and he asked the king for some additional time to seek to know the proper interpretation of that dream, and God gave it to him as he, Daniel, and his three companions prayed urgently to God for God to reveal that, and he did, and he told him what the dream consisted really of this statue, huge statue, and and it was a enormous statue, dazzling, brilliant, and the head of the statue was made of pure gold. The chest and arms of the statue were made of silver. The midsection, core, we'd say, and even the upper legs of the statue were made of bronze, and the lower leg and the feet were made of partly iron, partly clay. And that was what he saw, but he didn't know what it meant. But the interpretation that God gave Daniel, and Daniel in turn shared with King Nebuchadnezzar, was that the head of gold of this huge figure represented Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom, the kingdom of Babylonia, which was above all other kingdoms of the world at that time. But Daniel told the king that the other parts represented successive kingdoms of the world and the world powers that would succeed Daniel, would succeed King Nebuchadnezzar, and they would not be as great as his, as prominent, but they would be a succession of 4 kingdoms thereafter. And the final part that he said was that in the final times, after those kingdoms had passed away, God, the only God, the God of heaven, the God that Daniel worshipped, and his 3 Israelite friends, would set up a kingdom that would never be destroyed, and it would never be crushed. All the other kingdoms would be overcome eventually, but not the final kingdom that God would set up. And when he gave that interpretation to King Nebuchadnezzar was so impressed and overwhelmed by it that he told Daniel, "Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and the revealer of mysteries, because he's enabled you to reveal this." So the king placed Daniel in even a higher a place of authority and prominence, and made him ruler really over all of Babylon, only under the king, and in charge. He put Daniel in charge of all the king's advisors. But then Daniel requested that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego also be allowed to help him serve in that capacity. Okay, that gets us into chapter 3. Now, chapter 3, apparently, I say apparently, it's my thought that maybe because Daniel, or God through Daniel, had revealed to King Nebuchadnezzar that he was the head of gold on this statue in the dream, represented Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom, it sort of puffed him up with pride. So subsequently, he decided to issue a decree for all the kingdom of Babylon that when sounds of different musical instruments were played, and the sounds came across the kingdom, that all the people of Babylon, Babylonians or not, including the Jews that had been transported there and were in exile, would bow down and worship him, the king. And so he said that anybody that doesn't, we're going to execute them by throwing them into a blazing furnace. Well, when that information when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego became aware of that decree, they knew that they could not do that. They could not be obedient to God, Jehovah God, who had told the whole Jewish people back in, let's just read it to you. Exodus chapter 20. It's the Ten Commandments. And it's in the Ten Commandments. And verse 3 of Exodus 20 says, the first of the Ten Commandments, you shall have no other gods before me. God, Jehovah God, told the Israelites, you shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything, in heaven above or on the earth below or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sins of the father to the third and fourth generations. So that was the first and second of the Ten Commandments. So it was fundamental to the Jews and to the Israelites and to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So they knew they were not going to be able to obey the king's decree. And so when different officials made that available to them, I'm sure they expressed their unwillingness and to do that. So that word got back to King Nebuchadnezzar, and he's troubled by it, and he brings them in, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Verse 14 of chapter 3, he asks them, is it true that you don't serve my God or worship the gold statue that I've set up? Now, if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music, then fall down and worship the statue I made. He'd had this great statue made that maybe kind of symbolized the statue in the dream he had had. And he said, but if you don't worship it, you will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God who can rescue you from my power? Now, apparently, although it's not recorded in these verses, but apparently he knew, had been told, and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had expressed that we cannot bow down and worship this God statue that you've made as a symbol of yourself. We can't do that because we have to worship only our God. So he makes this statement, Nebuchadnezzar, when he's talking to the three of them, that what God is going to be able to save you from my power when I throw you, if you still refuse, if you continue to refuse, into a fiery furnace. He was saying, the Babylonians worship numerous gods. So it wouldn't have bothered King Nebuchadnezzar that Daniel or Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or any of the Israelites also worshipped a God, the God, Jehovah God, because he would have just said, well, that's just one more God. You're entitled to worship him. But when he made this decree, he said, you've got to worship this God that I've erected to myself as a symbol of my power. He said, no God that you can worship is going to rescue you from the consequences of your refusal to worship and bow down before my idol. But verse 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego responded to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need time to give you an answer to this question. It's sort of as if Nebuchadnezzar had said, now when you think about it, you study about it, if you're willing to die, and then then you bow down to the God that I've erected. But they say in response to them, and I think they replied, I think they did this with respect, and I believe even humility, but with firmness. They said, we don't need more time. We don't need to study about it. If the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire that you are going to throw us into. He can do that. He can rescue us from the power of even you, the king. But if he doesn't, we want you as king to know that we will not we are not able, we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue that you've set up. There's a lot in these verses, a lot of substance in these verses. He's saying, they're saying, we serve a God, and I believe they were saying this with humility and respect. I don't believe they were cocky. I don't believe they were arrogant. I don't believe they were disrespectful. But I believe they just said, the God that we serve, He can save us. Because Nebuchadnezzar had just asked, what God is going to be able to save you if I throw you into a fiery furnace? And they say, our God, the God that we worship, He can do that. He can rescue us from any furnace that you throw us into, any type of death, execution that you may choose to inflict upon us. He can do that. Our God is the God who can save us. But even if He doesn't save us, if He doesn't choose to rescue us, we're still not going to worship your God, because we are committed solely to the worship and sole allegiance of our God, who is God. He's the only God. So we cannot, consistent with our faith, do that. Now, at this point, they didn't know if God would rescue them or not. They didn't know how the story was going to turn out. I think they were pretty sure that King Nebuchadnezzar was serious, that he was going to have them killed by being thrown into a fiery furnace and die in that way. I don't think they were doubtful about that, but they didn't know. I don't think they fretted over the possibility that God might not choose to rescue them, even though they were confident He could, and that's what they expressed to the king. But said, but if He doesn't rescue us, we still will worship Him, and we will not bow down and worship your God, your image, the statue that you've made. Now, this is kind of interesting. I thought about this as I was reading and studying this, and thinking about it, how this crisis of belief, of their deciding to be faithful and obedient and honor their allegiance to God, Jehovah God, as opposed to obeying the orders of the king, the government, those in authority there. How this compared to that we looked at last week in chapter 1 of the book of Daniel, when Daniel said that he couldn't eat of the king's dietary food plan, which would have included food that was forbidden, types of food that was forbidden by the Old Testament laws that God had given Moses, recorded back in Leviticus chapter 11 for that. How this compared with that crisis. We don't know. There certainly was not, it was not expressed back then by the king. If these young men whom I'm grooming for 3 years, I want you to groom them 3 years and train and educate and everything to be in my service. If they don't obey me, he didn't say I'm going to kill them. Well, he could have, but they didn't say that. You don't know what his reaction would have been at that. But we know here, this is, but that involved obedience to the some of the dietary laws that God had given. They were important to the Jews, but this commandment about the worship is fundamental to faith at all. It's fundamental to any relationship with God. So this was, in my estimation, a much greater crisis being faced by, recorded here, by Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego than the one that they faced and Daniel faced about not eating the king's rich food and drinking his wine, but instead just they wanted to just eat vegetables and water. And so this is the fundamental of who would be their God, and it would be God. Okay, when they tell the king this, then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with rage, and the expression of his face changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He gave orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than customary, and he commanded some of his best soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, throw them into the fiery furnace. So these men, they were tied up and thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Since the king's command was so urgent and the furnace was extremely hot, the raging flames killed the men, the soldiers who carried Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the blazing furnace of fire. But so the king, he was infuriated. Everybody knew he had made this edict, this decree for everybody there to worship and to fall down. Excuse me, to worship the image that he had created. And undoubtedly, many people knew that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and presumably Daniel. We don't know what's going on with Daniel, but I think it's safe to assume that he would not have done so either. So the king is mad. He's just mad. You don't buck the king. You don't tell the king you're not going to obey his commands, his decrees, his edicts, but they did. So he gets mad. What caused it? What? Pride. People, power, as the saying goes, corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, he was absolutely the most powerful man, so it corrupted him with pride. He didn't want to be disputed. He didn't want to be challenged. He didn't want to be disobeyed. So he goes into this rage, and he says he's going to make an example of these 3 so that everybody else around, all the other people, will hear and know and see this and know they can't afford. They know what's going to happen when the king is disobeyed. All right, verse 24. Then King Nebuchadnezzar jumped up after his soldiers, even perishing as they did so, threw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fiery furnace. He jumped up in alarm. He said to his advisor, "Didn't we throw 3 men bound in the fire?" "Yes, of course, Your Majesty," they replied to the king. "Look," he said, "I see 4 men, not tied, walking around in the fire unharmed. And the 4th of them," he could apparently recognize Shadrach, and Meshach, and Abednego from the light. He could see, he recognized their figure. He said, "But the fourth one looks like the son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace of blazing fire and called out, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you servants of the Most High God, come out." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. Well, this clearly is the intervention of God to save these 3 men, his servants, who had been obedient to him in refusing to bow down and obey and worship any other God than God Jehovah. He was rescuing them, but he did it in such a way that in what could be seen in the furnace was not only the 3 of the young Israelites walking around. They weren't tied up anymore. Apparently the ropes had disappeared, been bored, but not them. But they weren't by themselves. They weren't walking alone. God was with them. This is a prefigure of Jesus himself. Nebuchadnezzar was right when he said the fourth figure looks like the son, a son of the gods. That's the highest way he could describe it. Was I don't know why I looked. Obviously, no one does, but he was able to recognize that it was like the greatest God that he could imagine, and he identified it as a son of God. Well, that's exactly what God gave us to rescue you and me. And he would do it in time, in the fullness of time, in his perfect timing, with the birth and the life of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, who would be the Savior for all through his death, his voluntary sacrificial substitutionary death on the cross for all who would rely upon Jesus and his death, who would put our faith and our trust and our reliance in Jesus and what he did and what God accomplished through Jesus on the cross for us. A substitute, a payment, atonement, a payment for our sin, satisfaction of our sin debt, so that by reliance upon him, God could accept us, would accept us, even in our sinfulness. He accepts us based on the perfection, the sinlessness of Jesus, his son. That's what he did, and that's of the vision that Nebuchadnezzar is able to see. They were not alone. They were not alone as the three, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were cast into the danger. They didn't know when they took their stand. They didn't know. This speaks to a word to you and to me that we're going to face trials and tribulation. I'm convinced that we very seldom face trials and tribulations because of our faith. We could, we should, we would if we were that faithful, if we were that strong in our obedience, and if we were that bold and fearless. But we shirk and we avoid, and we find ways to avoid persecution. Now we face some ridicule and that, but not much. And I'm not saying that you ought to go out and look and try to get persecuted, but we all ought to be bold. And when we're called upon, when are we called upon to worship other gods? Well, every time we turn the television on and we watch commercials that are appealing to our comforts and conveniences and our pride and our selfishness, when we go after the things of the world, we begin to worship those things. Think about that. We don't take a very bold stand. We're guilty of that. I'm guilty of that. You're guilty of that. I don't mean to offend you, but we are, because we are our gods. The gods we are tempted to worship are not the statues of gold or whatever they be, the graven images as were in Daniel's day and the other three's day. They're more subtle. They're the things that Satan has used to get our attention and to be attractive and to appeal to our pride, our desire to be independent, to decide what we want to do, when we want to do it, how we want to do it, and all that. And so these are the things of the world that we go after, and that we do it. We don't think about it, but that's what we're doing. So this should remind us to take our stand, and it should remind us that if and when we may be called upon to take a stand, when it may not turn out well, we may perish. Then our mindset should be, if we perish, we perish. God is able to rescue us. He may choose to do that, but if He doesn't, I'm still going to be faithful to Him. That's what He calls us to, is faithfulness. Not knowing the outcome. We do know the outcome. We know the end. We don't know the outcome in this world. Well, I don't know the outcome of today or tomorrow, and you don't either. We know the ultimate outcome, because the ultimate outcome is sealed by the blood of Jesus given on the cross for us, and our faith commitment, our entrusting, our turning away, our repenting, our turning aside, changing our mind about relying upon anybody else, anything else in the world that we could ever depend on for God to accept us, and because other than depending on what Jesus did on the cross. That's what we do. That's why we're saved. That's how we're saved. And because of that salvation, God has us in His hand. He'll never let go of us. And in His timing, when He wraps everything up on this whole world down here, He'll come for us. He'll come for us. And we'll be with Him. Father, thank you. Thank you for the reminder that we get from these verses. Thank you for the challenge from these scriptures to be faithful to you, regardless of how it may come out in the circumstances of this life, in this world, because you are with us, and you will be with us. You promise to never leave us or forsake us, and you'll work all things ultimately for our ultimate good through Jesus Christ our Lord. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.